What's up, guys? Welcome back to Vanover Customs. Today is an exciting day. We're putting this beautiful Arbor press into service. And to really commemorate this machine, I thought I would do something a little bit different. I thought I would make a video talking about some of the things I like about this press, some of the things I learned during the restoration process, and hopefully answer some questions that are going to come up in the comments. Now, typically the type of videos I make when it comes to restoration is a video where you see me do a bunch of things. And I know a lot of people really like that, but there's a bunch of people that also really like to see how something is done and why it's done. And so what I'm trying to do with this project is kind of please both camps of people. I'm gonna do a video, if you guys already haven't seen it, of the full restoration build process, and that'll be a link up here in the description. But I wanted to do a video like this following up the restoration to just talk about my experience with the restoration, good, bad, questions I'm gonna get about the press, and I'm happy to answer them in the comments. But I thought it would be cool to just do a video because it is a cool piece of machinery. It was a really cool restoration, and just to kind of give more context for those of you who want it. So the first question that I'm gonna start out by answering is, how old is this machine? So this machine, I don't know how old it is exactly, but I have a guess. So the patent date on the side is September 17th, 1912. Now, after doing some research, it seems like Mr. Eames, who came up with the Eames Press Company, which was later bought out by Atlas, who was bought out by Dake, came up with this press design earlier in the 1900s, and then there were some changes and iterations, one of them having to do with this swing arm. So I believe this was the second or third patent, but I believe this was probably made sometime between 1910 and 1918. I don't know, that's just a range. But the moral of the story is it's old. You know, it's 100+ years old, and that's really cool that we're able to take a piece of equipment that old, and it was still in service. We took it out of commission, restored it, and are hopefully bringing it into a better level of service than it was. And I know that we are. So the second question I want to address is, why do we restore a piece of equipment like this? Now, I know this may seem obvious if you're watching the video. Of course, restoration is always a good thing, and it is. But restoration is a lot of work. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, and the real question is it worth it, right? And the answer to that is never clear, right? Because it depends. So from a business standpoint, when you're restoring a machine, you gotta ask yourself, does restoring this machine outweigh the cost of getting a new one, right? And a lot of times, for these large pieces of equipment, it does. It makes sense to restore them compared to buying a new one, but a lot of times the older equipment doesn't have features of newer equipment, and that's why a lot of people these days do not restore things. They move to something newer because a newer item has more options and features. But in a lot of cases, just pragmatically speaking, it most of the time makes sense to fix what you have as long as it's a good piece of equipment than to go out and replace it. Now, it gets tricky when you're going through as much effort as I'm going through for something as simple as a press like this. And is it worth it from a business standpoint? Probably not, right? The press itself worked how it was. It had some issues, a lot of issues, but it did work. It would have made sense to spend a minimal amount of time fixing the functional issues and move on. And this kind of crosses over between business and pleasure, because I really do enjoy doing this. I think it adds a lot of pride to the shop, makes me feel great when I'm using the machine, and it allows me to bring the machine into the highest level of service that I can bring it to, which just allows it to last longer and hopefully provide a better experience using it. So I hope that really kind of answers that question. And that question is going to come up for each piece of equipment in my shop, and for anyone who's thinking about restoring it. It's a really important question to ask, because of course you just want to restore it, but it is a big time and financial commitment, and you really got to figure out if it's worth it. All right, another question that I'm going to get asked about this Arbor press is, why did you restore this Arbor press when you had a perfectly good Famco 4C Arbor press? And that's a great question. Basically, the answer boils down to, I had that Famco 4C, which is a 12-ton unit. It's a great unit. I was using that on a pretty regular basis, and it's a great press. But they had one issue. And the issue is I wanted to restore it, just like I did this one, and it didn't have a base. And I knew that I was going to make a base for it, but I wanted to make an elaborate base. I thought it would make a cool video and give a really cool effect to the press by having a base. I wanted to make the base with some bent 1/4-inch plate, and it was going to be really cool, but it was going to be very labor intensive. And it's funny how things develop, and that's how a lot of restorations go. I thought to myself, you know what, this is going to be a lot of work, and I want to put my press into service. So I kept pushing off the restoration, and I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just get a press that's a floor standing model, and then I won't have to worry about going crazy restoring it and building an elaborate base. And sure enough, I looked online and I found this pretty cheap. I think I paid $450 at an auction. And I was purchasing it in hopes to take my other Arbor press and just kind of sit it on the floor. And then I already had something that had a base because it was a floor mount, and put a little bit of effort into it and check the project off the list, right? Because I have a huge list of projects and restorations. I wanted to just be done with it and move forward. And what a lot of times happens to me, I know it happens to other people, is I started stripping the paint. I was just going to give it a quick paint job, and I found some issues, and I realized, you know what, let's do a full-blown restoration. I had the time, and it turned out to be way more time than I would have spent on the other one. So there's absolutely no reason why I should have done this compared to the other one. In retrospect, it's probably the same time commitment, but the benefit is this press actually has a higher tonnage rating, and it's beefier, and it has more clearance. So if I was going to put the time into anything, putting the time into something that I didn't want to upgrade makes a lot more sense than putting the time into something like that, because ultimately with that press, it was really good, but I always would have wished that I had a floor standing unit, and that's what this is. I really wanted one of the Dake models, and I would have loved to buy one new, but frankly, 12 to 15 grand for like the biggest one, it's just ridiculous. The Dake models hold their value really well, and I like to try to buy quality, but I like to get it cheap because I'm gonna put a lot of time, and I just couldn't find a huge Dake floor standing unit that was, you know, cheap. And so because this looked bad, it was cheap. And to be honest, this is very similar to the Dake, obviously not the swing arm, but the older Dakes. And so it kind of allowed me to have the best of both worlds. Another question that is a valid question to ask is, why an Arbor press versus a hydraulic press? And that is an excellent question. The short answer, you need both. And I want both, and I will have both at some point. But what I'm hoping to get is I'm hoping to get a Dake 150-ton hydraulic press. But just like with the Dake Arbor presses, I can't find one for under 8 grand. It's worth it, right, getting one for around that price used, because they're easily 30+ thousand new. But I really would love to get one cheaper if possible. And so in the interim, until I can find or build one of those presses, I have been using my Arbor press for as much I can use it for, besides the stuff that it just can't be done with the Arbor press. The benefit of an Arbor press is control, right? You do want a hydraulic press when it comes to heavy tonnage pressing, and for that reason, I'll be getting one. But until then, an Arbor press is great because you can use it in the ratcheting mode, and you can use it in the compound mode and get some good pressure, and it will do a lot of jobs. But it provides a level of control that a hydraulic press just doesn't provide due to the feel, right? You can have good control on a hydraulic press, but this is a very manual machine, and it gives you a great feel. And so when I'm driving a broach, for example, or I'm pushing out a bushing, this tool is great. I had a job last week where a guy came in with a motorcycle fork, and it had 2 bushings in it that were real small. And I was using the old press to press them out, and it wasn't going anywhere. And I realized that it was pressed out in the wrong direction. Well, because I was using this by hand, I could feel that it wasn't going anywhere, and I was able to stop, adjust, and fix it. With a hydraulic press, because there's so much pressure involved, a lot of times you don't have that feel and control, and on some jobs, that's important. So that's why I think having a really nice arbor press is important, in addition to a hydraulic press. All right, another question I'm gonna get asked on this is, why in the heck did you spend so much time on the small stuff? And what I mean, handles, knobs, making your own bolts, it's kind of ridiculous, and it is ridiculous. And I think it added a lot of additional time to this project that was unnecessary, and that's right, it did. That's where enjoyment and the actual process cross, because I really wanted to take an opportunity to do some fun projects on this, like making the handles, making the stainless bolts, and it wasn't necessary, but I thought it would be a great opportunity to practice some skills and do some learning and make some stuff that I thought would be fun. And the benefit is yeah, it looks great, but ultimately it was for fun. That's the main reason, and it was for learning. One of the other really important questions concerning this restoration is, what is the biggest challenge that I face in this project? And I had a lot of things that were pretty challenging, but we have one thing or one part that was a clear winner in terms of difficulty, and that was the rack. Now, if you watched that video of me restoring this rack or repairing it or whatever you want to call it, it was pretty crazy. It was a pretty crazy repair. It's a repair that's probably not recommended, not necessarily because it doesn't work, but because it's very time consuming, very labor intensive. But I wanted to do it to see if it was possible, and it was possible. Did it make sense? Probably not. But I learned a lot, I got it done, and ultimately it did work. Now, I think a lot of you guys are probably asking an obvious question, which is, why wouldn't you just buy pre-made rack? Because they do make it, and you're right, they do. I went on MasterCar, and they didn't have this rack in the right size, or I would have bought it. The other obvious question is, well, why didn't you get a piece of 4140 and just take it over to the horizontal mill and cut a new rack? That's a great question. In retrospect, if I would have known how much work this was going to be, I would have done that. The main issue is that you would have needed a proprietary cutter to cut the rack, and it wouldn't be worth it, and it wouldn't be. But maybe had I made a cutter that was specific for what we needed, I could go and make a rack once the cutter was made, and it would have been more efficient, or probably about the same amount of efficiency, and at least more consistent in terms of the hardness throughout the part, and that's true. But ultimately, I wanted to see, could I take a hardened part and weld it with a hardened rod and machine it so that way it was back to stock with no wear. And we were able to accomplish that about 90%, 95% of the way, and I'm very happy with the results, but I wouldn't recommend someone attempt to do a repair like that because it is very time consuming with the post-heat and the preheat, and then trying to machine hardened material. Just went through a lot of end mills, and it was a pain in the butt. But that was by far the most difficult part to repair on this project. Just a quick question I'm going to get is about moving this thing, and that is a great question. When you're working with heavier pieces of equipment like this, moving them is kind of a nightmare, especially when you're disassembling them. And first and foremost, jib crane is a huge winner. If you don't have a jib crane and you're in a shop, get one. Completely worth it. Tons of work to buy, to move, install, but once it's installed, man, it is so nice to just hit that button and take heavy pieces off machinery. It is completely worth it. The other thing that we did, which I know a couple people are gonna be against, I was even against it, but I just decided to do it, is we drilled and tapped a very shallow, about an inch deep hole in the back neck for an eye hook. And that allowed me to move the main casting around and hang it, because when you're moving machinery, if you can hang it versus picking up at the bottom, it's always better. Because if something's hanging, it will never fall over, or very rarely. But if you have something underneath a forklift and it's top heavy, that can create some issues. So I did add a 7/8, 9 maybe, threaded eye hook to the top that I will unscrew now that it's in position. My main concern was that it was gonna weaken the spine by drilling a hole and thus create a break. But to be honest, I feel like the spine is really overbuilt and the hole only goes like an inch, inch and a quarter deep. So it was a risk that I was willing to take. I guess time will tell, but I think it's fine. And by having that hook, I could just go ahead and put a sling through there and move it into position and move the casting around. And then as far as moving these wings or tables, I actually had a magnet for a lifting plate, so I could put that on there and maneuver that around. So kind of made moving things a lot easier. And the last and final question, which I've intentionally saved to the end, which is the most obvious question that I'm sure everyone is asking: why in the heck did you paint it pink, right? And the short answer is, I wanted to paint it pink. If you look around my shop, I have a bunch of pieces of equipment that are different colors. And the reality is painting stuff in a busy job shop, completely worthless. There's zero benefit. I know that. It's something I've learned. You're busy, a painted piece of equipment, nothing, means nothing. If anything, it's gonna get scratched, dinged, beat up, and that's completely true. But with that being said, I do have a couple of my pieces of equipment painted, and they're painted bright colors, because when I use that machine, it makes me feel good, right? It's like a vibrancy that machine has by being bright, at least for me. A lot of machines in machine shop are gray, and by nature, machine shops are grungy and dirty. And so having some of these bright colors really helps increase the aesthetic in the shop. It's very unique, and I think it just adds a little bit of life and zest and joy to the actual machining and building and creating process. I know the pink is something that some people are just gonna not understand, and that's totally fine. I knew that people would be bothered by it, and I'm okay with that. I've always wanted to kind of push the envelope with the most risky color, and I think pink is it, specifically because it seems like it's a girl's color, and whether that's true or not doesn't really matter. I've always wanted to kind of be risky and do it, and I figured why not on this project, and I thought because of the shape and the color choice, it would just really make this piece of equipment pop. And I think it really has. And so I painted it pink. I'm happy with the way it looks. I know some of you guys are gonna love it. Some of you guys are gonna hate it, and that's okay. There's no other issues with that. So, and with that being the final question, we're gonna end the video here. If you guys wanna watch the build process, I have multiple videos. You can find them in a playlist. There'll be some links up above. And if you like this video, comment below. I want to know what you guys think, and we'll see you in the next one.